So, Bishop Brendan, you are Bishop of Limerick. You were an attendee, a voting member of the Rome Assembly for the 2 years, which is where I met you first. And you've been involved actually in synodality for a long time in Limerick, I think. Tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about your own experiences of synodality.
Well, actually, my first experience of synodality goes back to when I was in Rome in the 1980s, 90s. They actually had a synod which the then Pope John Paul II launched. And I remember being intrigued because I just felt the synod went on and on and on and on. I never understood when it began and when it was finished. It was one of these mysteries to me. Of course, I was studying, so I wasn't that directly involved. But having studied theology, I was interested in the topic itself. And so when I became a bishop, at the time, my diocese had done a lot of good work on listening processes and had tried a lot in that way to move things forward. But I felt a synod was a good thing to do because a synod kind of has a certain, I don't want to use the word structure as if it's tying everything down, but it gives you a procedure, a way, a mechanism, energy to pull people together into this kind of act of trying to understand, well, what is it God wants from us? And that turned out to be a wonderful experience. We had it in 2016. And certainly my memory of that experience was really, really positive because I remember being asked afterwards, well, was it worth doing? And my answer was absolutely. Whatever about the fruits and whatever might come out of it, it was a fantastic church experience. We met in groups. There was kind of inputs on even to do with, what does the church say about certain topics, meeting together to discuss the problems on the ground, and then coming together, 400 of us, mostly lay people, at the actual 3-day event. And it was just a wonderful church experience that I personally felt would remain with people forever. And I do remember having spoken to a bishop friend of mine from abroad before I actually convoked the synod, just to see, well, what do you think? And he said to me, look, I said, maybe people say these things can end up like it's just a document gathering dust on a shelf. He said, that might even be true, but it's worth doing. And I think that's launched me into it. So certainly that was a wonderful experience. And then obviously then, as you say, I took part in the events in 2023, 2024, the Synod assemblies in Rome. Wonderful experience, about 360 of us from all over the world, just meeting people, sharing ideas. Being together. I mean, the coffee breaks were as important perhaps as the big sessions. And you were meeting people, picking up ideas and hearing perspectives. On the one hand, discovering that church is incredibly varied. We live in very different contexts. We live in very different social understandings of reality and life. And at the same time, it's something incredible that all over the world, the church has a kind of a common heartbeat. There are certain issues all over the world which are, pushing us. It's as if the Spirit, I mean, it's not as if it's true, the Spirit is guiding the church forward. And I felt that is something which we touch when we get into synodality, that we get, a few years ago, as part of our own synodal process here, I put together a little short collection of extracts from the Acts of the Apostles. And I entitled it, Who Leads the Church? Because very often, we have this whole question about the Pope, the bishops, the priests, it's too hierarchical, it's patriarchal, and sure, look, there's something in that, and that does need to be looked at. But we do have to recognize at the end of the day, the church is multiform. There's many aspects of church life going on with various elements of governance going on within the church. You have, yes, of course, the Pope, the bishops, but you have charisms, you have orders, you have religious orders, you have communities, you have movements, you have a whole variety of networks of forms of life of the church. And I think that's something that's being highlighted by synodality. In other words, the church can't be straitjacketed into narrow confines. It's something much more vast. And in a way, I met with a group of young people yesterday or 2 days ago, and there were different youth groups, and they were presenting themselves to each other. And like the image I used was, in a way, what we'll be doing this afternoon is having this experience of the church as a wonderful garden. There's many, many different flowers. They're different, but they're all the beauty of the church, and we can admire each one. Perhaps there mightn't be my one, that wouldn't my way, but we can admire them. And I think synodality helps us do that.
One of my favourite sections is it's 19 or something, and it talks about the church drawn from every tribe, nation, language on earth. And that was what the assembly really said to me. It was like, wow, we're all Catholic, but we're all so different. And there was this kind of explosion of life and energy and passion. It was just, yeah, it was amazing. So,
Absolutely.
the final document then, I mean, that's what we were doing. We were writing this document, and it had to then be applicable to all these different parts of the world. And I think that's one of the things that it's easy to forget when we pick it up and we think, well, how is that applying in my little church in the UK? That actually it has to apply in so many different places. But what were some of the standout ideas from the document for you, particularly kind of as a bishop, like thinking into the future? What was really inspiring for you?
Well, look, I mean, I have to say, and I know this might be sound slightly abstract, but the first main thing I have to say, I was struck by the fact that if you look at the chapter headings of that document, the word conversion is nearly in 4 or 5, and basically its theme is included in the 5th chapter. Conversion is really at the heart of what this is all about. And we think of conversion like St. Paul converted or somebody, the big conversion. But I mean, there's the everyday conversion of how we view each other, how we view the church, and how we view our future. There's a conversion needed there because we all come with our own categories, we all come with our own history. And even at times, especially in our parts of the world where maybe there have been big challenges and we can be a bit downbeaten at times, I think the conversion is to, in hope, open up to the fact that the church is always going to be new in the sense that the Holy Spirit is always renewing it. Of course, the church is always the same, but there's always new creative forms coming to life, and we have to be converted to that. Do I really believe that? Do I believe it's possible that when I look out at the profile of the clergy, the profile of those going to church, do I really believe that it's possible to have something new happening? And so I think that's the first point. It talks about conversion. There has to be a personal conversion, yes, ourselves, each of us, but there has to be a conversion, a pastoral conversion, the way we go about doing things in our parishes. That has to be new, a pastoral conversion. A cultural conversion, the way of doing things in terms of how we understand church life, how we understand our structures. And we've always done it this way. Pope Francis was forever saying that. Watch that trap. Oh, we always did it this way. That's a trap. And then finally, spiritual conversion. And a spiritual conversion perhaps is one that we need to be more attentive to, I think, in the synodal pathway. So that's certainly a major idea that stood out for me, the conversion aspect. But I think the other aspect was, for instance, there's a line that says somewhere, really, we've got to start working on what we can start working on. In other words, where there are now today possibilities of structures, they call them participative structures, well, we really should be implementing them. Parish councils, diocesan councils, of course we have priest councils, finances councils. That's by canon law, you're meant to have a finance council. Is it always there? But certainly diocesan councils aren't always necessarily there. Pastoral councils aren't always, parish councils aren't always there. And yet this document says if we don't get those going immediately, quickly, we really are going to, I think, discourage people because they're going to feel there's nothing really much happening after all this. So in a way, these are kind of quick hits that we can move on to at least get those things going.
Then in your own diocese, I mean, in Diocese of Limerick, what do you feel is coming out from the document for you in that particular place? And what might be some kind of next steps there?
Yes, well, I mean, certainly, first and foremost, I have to be grateful for my predecessor who had started many what he called listening processes, and they were something which already helped because people have to get used to that. Actually, that I remember they describing how it wasn't always easy at the beginning. People sometimes could take something that was said personally, where it might only really have been intended as a general observation. But, that's always a challenge, isn't it? That you get feedback and you hear feedback as criticism, where really all it is feedback. So I think there has to be, number one, a learning of how to listen. And certainly we've had a lot of practice on that, but we need to keep going with that. From my point of view, I think I took up out of this final document the need for greater accountability. So one of the things I did when I came home, of course, first and foremost, was I put together both this year and last year a short 4-page summary of what went on in the synod, because I do think communication of the whole story about the synod in general needs to take place. While we can be happy a lot of people did take place in the process since 2021-23, the fact of the matter is it's still a relatively small number of Catholics who actually know about this. So I think a major task is communication, and I'm kind of very conscious of that's something we need to be doing. But one of the suggestions I took out of the final document as well was the need to publish an annual report. So I put together an annual report for last year, 2024, and it was a good thing to do. I actually personally enjoy doing it because you begin to realize that actually a lot goes on in a diocese, but we don't get the news out. We don't get the word out. It's kind of presumed that everybody knows it, but in fact they don't. And so, as well as being an exercise of accountability for your stewardship as a bishop, obviously in my case, but it's true of the whole diocese, it's also actually, as the final document puts it, it's a way of communicating good news. And so that's something I did. Now, we're fortunate in Ireland. We also have the Irish synodal pathway going on. That was launched in 2021. So one of the things we have been doing there is actually providing training for people. This is important. You know, if people want to be facilitators or if people want to help parishes get involved, we probably have to offer training. Mm. And that is something we did out of our first initial soundings in preparation for the Universal Synod. That was between 21 and 23. We got some research done as to what were the needs that came out of that experience, and we got good feedback. And certainly one of the helpful feedbacks was there was a need for greater training of people who were more directly involved in facilitating the synodal processes. So I think that's something that we've been attentive to, and we've worked on it. The synodal team, I have a synodal team in the diocese, and that's important to have a synodal team. Nevertheless, it's good to note that in the final document, and perhaps in the Pathways document that came out since, I think it's more the Pathway document, it makes an important point. The synodal team is not meant to be replacing everything else. The synodal team isn't to be seen as just another participatory body. They're alongside the diocesan councillor. They're simply the kind of the facilitators of a process. And I think we have to understand them better. I think that needs to be clarified more. What's the role of the teams? But it's important to have a team, I think, in every diocese. A bishop can't do it on his own. So a team is very important. But I think clarifying the role of the team, that's something I think I'm going to have to attend to a little bit more as well as we move forward.
Thank you. I mean, I'm really interested, and this is a question I'm just throwing at you because I'm just curious about it. What came out of that 2016 synod, and how is that kind of informing your path as you move forward?
Yes, out of that synod, we then put together a pastoral plan. And the pastoral plan had 6 priorities. Now, during the 2 years of the synod, we had obviously done a lot of conversations, and out of that came 12 themes. But we realized we couldn't do all 12 themes in a synod. So as an exercise, we got together the whole assembly and decided what 6 themes we were going to work on, and we remained with those themes. So basically, belonging, the sense of belonging, and that's an inclusion, all those topics, the sense of formation in the faith. That was an important point. A whole follow-up of family ministry, liturgy, all that goes into do with liturgy, young people, and then new models of leadership in the diocese. So out of that, we began to look, for instance, at the whole area of pastoral units, and we tried to do that. Now, COVID set us back a bit, I think, in a lot of our progress, but we were making progress, and we still are trying to do that, in the whole area of pastoral unit teams working together. At the moment, it's clergy. I do envisage that lay people should be part of those teams moving forward. We also developed a certificate in pastoral leadership for lay people who were interested in parishes. So we have a certain number of people who've gone through that program, leading to a certificate in pastoral leadership. We liaise then with groups who reach out to the marginalised, the poor, and we had a kind of workshops for them, our support group, I should say, might be a better word initially. And more recently, we've had one or two outreaches to be supportive, or at least a place where people of the LGBT plus community can feel that they're welcomed. So these are the kind of things. Looking at the themes, the 6 themes. In presenting the annual report for last year, it was a good exercise because, for instance, I realized we had slipped back in terms of what we were doing about family, support of family, and liturgy. So that was a good thing to be able to note, there are 2 areas we need to work more on, So why we have the pastoral plan. In the pastoral plan, then, what we did was we tried not to be too prescriptive. I'm not too sure if we got this right. We presented a wide suite, a menu of options as the kind of things people could do. But in doing that, I think and this would be my fault, probably needed to have more of an engine driving it than we did. There were circumstances as to why that came about, and of course COVID, but that probably was needed. It's not enough to offer people options. You really do have to help them think their way through them and actually do them, because if they get too many options, too much of a menu, they just get a bit not sure what they should actually do. Yeah, so that was our experience.
I love the idea of you having this, you've got priorities, and you've got your report, and you're reporting back against that, and you can see, oh, hang on a minute, we missed something here. We need to pick that up again. I think it's very purposeful, it feels to me. I think people will be also saying to you, what is it about synodality that really engages people beyond, kind of previous, we've done listening processes and that kind of thing before. What do you feel that it is about synodality that has got more about it, that is something that you've really engaged with and wanted to kind of really grapple with for your diocese?
Well, I personally, I think that the synodality is really a way of bringing out what the Second Vatican Council deep down was about. Certainly in Ireland, I don't know elsewhere. Of course, we did certain tweaks after the Second Vatican Council. The churches changed, the direction which the priest said Mass changed. You suddenly had guitars at Mass. You had people obviously praying in English. We had the pulpit changed. But really, they were cosmetic changes. And I think the deep impact of Vatican II, even if though it is 60 years ago this year, it finished, which seems, for of course you're talking to younger people, like an eternity away. But the fact of the matter is, for the church, it's not that long ago, and it actually still is, despite everything, to be fully implemented. So in my view, that is really, I think, the main point. I mean, Sister Natalie Baigent, who's the Undersecretary for the Office of the Synod in Rome, she quotes Ormond Rush, the Australian theologian, who has this phrase that synodality is Vatican II in a nutshell. And that's what gives me a certain, enthusiasm. Vatican II really was about us rediscovering our place in the world today. And the church is the Church of Christ forever. In itself, the church remains faithful to what it is as established by Christ. But nevertheless, the church, in its forms, in its expressions, in its way of doing things, it'll always have to be brought up to date in a certain sense. And I think that's what the synodality helps us to do. That's not easy, because it does require us to have a shake-up in how we view things. And the Vatican Council was clear. The church today has a role to play. It has to be in the world an instrument, a sign of unity with God, of course, but unity among humankind. That's our mission. And it's a mission for peace, but it's a mission that starts with recognizing we ourselves of church have to, in a way, become experts in this, to put it like that. And that means we have to focus more on relationships. Now, this kind of, for some people, can be a bit of a yawn. Oh, gosh, don't, the church is about God, the church is about spirituality. It is, and that's true. But one of the great, I think, pluses of this final document is also the observation that we encounter God in relationships. So often we understood redemption, salvation as our soul being redeemed individually. And relationships are something extra. Even philosophically, we talked about that. Whereas with Christ, relationships become the point of the encounter with God. Mm. So for me, the synodality is about the deep down offering the possibility of that being discovered. But it's a long journey. I don't think we're going to get there very quickly. Yves Congar, the great Dominican theologian, he, in writing about the Second Vatican Council, said, if there's one text of the New Testament that summarizes Vatican II for him, it is, where two or more are gathered in my name, I am there among them. I don't think we've really yet fully grasped that. Of course, we say Jesus among us now, but in fact, what do we mean? What do we mean? So the attentiveness to the presence of the risen Jesus, not just in the sacraments, not just in the word, not just in each other, but among us. It's what opens up with synodality.
That's beautiful. I think also there's something about, you've just been expressing it really, but there's something about a kind of call to holiness in all of that, which is, it's quite tricky, isn't it? Like relationally, like we have to be open to one another. We have to be that self-emptying. You have to be patient. You have to be humble. It's not a very it's not a very kind of heroic holiness, is it? It's not a kind of get out there and feed 10,000 people. It's a kind of daily dying to self that is required in all of that. And I think when we begin these synodal processes, we find that can be why it's harder than we think it might be.
That's why it's harder than we think it might be, and it's deeper than we think it might be. In fact, you come back to what you said. That one of the questions there about the line about what standouts for me from the synod final document. There's a line in it which I kind of like a lot. I wrote it down here. So it said, synodality is a path of spiritual renewal and structural reform. So it has to be structural as well, of course, that enables the church to be more participatory and missionary so that it can walk with every man and woman radiating the light of Christ. I just think that's a fantastic definition. When people say, what is synodality? I think that definition gets it. Now, of course, we have to fill that out, but I think that's a good definition. It's in number 28 of the document.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite lines too. I'm always quoting that to people. I find it really helpful. Like, I feel like we've been down, had a lot of programs for spiritual renewal, and then they come and they fade. We have a lot of structural reform going on, certainly in the UK at the moment, but if there's no spiritual renewal, if the two don't go together, you're not going to have lasting change. And I find that really helpful. What would you say would be the kind of chief challenges or obstacles of embedding synodality and taking these next steps?
Well, of course, I've mentioned them briefly. Yeah, look, let's be honest. We are an aging profile. Our clergy is aging, and not just our clergy. I remember some years ago, I was at a meeting, but I was very young bishop, and I was, encouraging great work between parishes, the collaboration, and we needed for new times and it was the laity that would have to step up to the plate. And I remember there was one young woman, and she was actually came from a disadvantaged part of the city, but a very bright, intelligent person. And she said to me at the coffee break, she said, Bishop, that was fantastic. But she said, your problem, what it is. And I said, what? He said, look around you. The people I was talking to, of course, were all they were all the age that I was saying, they're a certain age. Look, it is an obstacle. We can't deny that. Perhaps other countries have less that problem than maybe we have now in Ireland. But at the same time, there's also, of course, that inertia, which is inevitable, I suppose, that in any system, we can just run out of energy. We can run out of energy. And that is a spiritual, structural, existential trial at times. To keep hope alive, I think, is what we really do have to pray for in terms of synodality, that there can always be something new, that there's a new possibility. Because otherwise we close the shop down. We say, well, look, the spirit has gone to sleep. There's nothing happening. And that really is a sin against the Holy Spirit. So we do have to keep hope alive. And to me, that's perhaps one of the obstacles. If we don't keep hope alive, where we're not allowing the Holy Spirit to work. And we do have to allow the Holy Spirit to work. And then encouraging each other. I think, at times we can maybe look at the negative, and I know myself, this is a temptation for myself. We can look at the negative, and we can, in a way, we can have a slightly destructive criticism. And while criticism is important, and analysis is important, and naming reality is important, I don't want to deny any of that. But we always just have to be careful that a destructive criticism just, it knocks us down. It doesn't necessarily build us up. Whereas really for synodality, there has to be the naming of reality, but there has to be the building up as well.
I think it has to be hope. There has to be hope, and there has to be joy. And I think if we've got those, with the love, the faith, that's just going to carry us forward, isn't it? I can hear people in my head when they're listening to this saying, one of the groups that really strangely stood outside the synodal process in lots of places were the parish priests and the clergy more generally. You've been at this for longer. You've been doing this since 2016. Have you got some lessons there about how have your priests engaged, and what's been ways in for them to this?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly in 2016, to be fair, they did engage. Now, admittedly, I think there has been research done on this around the world as well. We did some work on it ourselves in Ireland in the synodal pathway, because it has been detected. I thought it was maybe something of our world, but when I went to Rome for the synodal assemblies, we discovered this was a worldwide phenomenon. And so there is a question, why is that the case? My own sense is there's a few things. Positively, I think priests understood synodality as giving laity their voice and opportunity to say their part, and didn't want to take from that, didn't want to interfere, so they stood back. And they meant it positively, I think. They stood back so that others could have their voice. The negative of that was, number one, they suddenly began to feel as if they were sidelined in the process, and they didn't have a voice, or that their voice didn't count. And perhaps we didn't always offer them the opportunities as priests to come together in the synodal process. Perhaps that is something. But also, another thing that has been said that resonates a little bit with me is that priests very often are just not quite sure, where is all this going? And, they're in the day-to-day in the life of the parish, and they're trying to keep everything going. And this process comes in, which isn't clear. At least it doesn't seem to be clear. It doesn't seem to have any specific goalposts. They're not quite sure where it's leading to. And so there's a certain caution. Yeah, I think there's something in that. Naturally, they're very busy, and as such, they don't want to just simply be taking on something that's just going to be a whole new world of work, as they see it, without being clear as to where it actually is going. Now, I know in our synodal documents, it's repeated time and again, this should not be seen as an extra layer of work. Rather, it is meant to be stitched into the way we go about things ordinarily. So I think that's going to be a challenge for the clergy to understand that and not see it as another item of work.
Yeah. I quite often sometimes think about it as it's actually synodality, rather than being a problem, is the way to solve the problem. So, well, we don't know what to do about mission, so no, well, oh, why are you having a listening process when you should be out on the streets? Well, because the being out, all the mission stuff we've done, how successful has that been? Maybe we ought to really be listening to people, engaging where they are, and then that helps us to be more effective through the relationships, like you were saying, building up those relationships.
Yeah, and providing opportunities. Like I'm about to launch now for the next few months conversations in the diocese about our future. I mean, the future arrangements of our parishes, because we know like there are issues here. Some of our parishes have financial problems, they have challenges. We don't have the personnel we had in the past. But, there's no point in me trying to come in with a solution. People have to discover themselves talking together about, well, how can we collaborate better as parishes? How are there ways we can do this? And it's really only by coming together and actually hearing the facts and figures of which we can present to people, certainly, but together to try to work out what's the way to go forward. And at times it can seem slower. I appreciate that. It can seem slower, and I know some people get fed up with process. They say, oh, it's too much process. We want to get results. But look, process brings results with it. And there's always the famous story of the man who's at a tree and he's trying to cut down a tree and he's an axe and he's axing his way, sawing his way gradually through the tree, and somebody's trying to tell him there's an electric saw here, and no, I'm too busy. And that can be a risk for all of us.
That's like parish life right now. Oh, that sounds, yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, we've also tried to change our structures previously, and you can end up with people very angry, very upset, if they don't understand, what the motivation behind this is, that it's, we're a body, a growing body, and things change in a body. But yeah, in order we are also doing the same in our diocese. So I think it's a great tool and an opportunity to do that and to have richness. Like I had an elderly lady say to me, she said, well, I don't really go to that church because it costs a fortune to park. And you just think, if you're sitting in Bishop's house, you don't know what the car parking arrangement is.
Exactly.
But it's a very practical wisdom, isn't it? Great ideas that come through. So you've just mentioned there you've got this plan to consult on your future pastoral provision. What other bits of the implementation pathway are you hoping to or maybe you're thinking into the future you might like to do?
In terms of our diocese, well, as I say, the immediate one is just looking at our future arrangements. But I'm also conscious that synodality isn't just about the church structures, or I should say the parish structures. Sometimes we immediately run to the parish structures. The final document, I think, also helps us to be a bit more global in our thinking, not global in the sense of world, but broader in our thinking. And it's something I appreciate. I've yet to do more myself. In other words, schools, for instance, are wonderful locations of synodality. But it's something perhaps we need to encourage and reflect on more. How can our school be a place of learning synodality? And actually make that a theme, a topic. Equally, the family is the first learning point of synodality. And is that something we promote in our diocese? How do we promote the synodality of family? But then, of course, also the synodality of the various realities that we have in our diocese. So, as I say, last week I had a meeting, and I was really happy. It was the first time we brought them together. We have a lot of different youth groups, well, a certain number anyway, of youth groups, and they're meeting away and doing, well, small seeds, but they're there. But it was wonderful to bring them together. Because by coming together, we got energy. We heard from each other. We heard the experiences from each other. We got a chance to encourage each other. So for me, synodality is also trying to network people so that we can learn from each other and go forward a bit more united in our, we would say, to use the church language, communion together. And that helps our mission. It strengthens us. And then each of us in our own specific way goes forward. So that was something that I liked. And I think that is something we can maybe roll out a bit more across the diocese in terms of networking. It would be wonderful, for instance, in our synodality, if we could have parishes that are more well-to-do and parishes that are maybe a bit more disadvantaged, if they could be reacting more, interacting more together, I think that would be a wonderful example of synodality. I'm not there yet, but I think it's something I would like to do, certainly. As regards those who have outreach to the marginalized, there too, we're trying to network a little bit more. And I think that too is important because, every diocese actually has a lot going on in terms of bodies working for the marginalized, not necessarily strictly speaking church bodies, although they may have had their roots in the church. But why not, as a church, be a catalyst to bring them together, so that they can be encouraged in their mission, each one distinct, but coming together. So these are kind of things that I'd like to, as I move forward, actually work on a bit more.
Sounds fantastic. One of the things I've been reflecting on, and we might do this in the School of Synodality in the spring, is more reflection on ourselves as baptized. Like I feel like the more I read that document, the more I suddenly understand the dignity of our baptism, the precious gift that it is, that we've never, that I feel like it's kind of taken for granted a lot in our communities. I'd love to do a bit more unpacking along those lines.
Yeah, no, you're spot on there. You're correct. Our own general secretary of the Synod process recently, she was at a meeting and she's found herself saying it without thinking too much. She said, very often we say, I was baptized in such and such a year in such and such a church. Whereas really we should say, I am baptized. And she said, well, a few people in the audience that she was speaking to came back up to her afterwards and said, that really, really struck them, that I am baptized. And indeed, in our own synodal pathway here in Ireland, we're going to have a meeting next month, but I'm part of the national team. But we have been reviewing a lot of the feedback that's been coming into us in preparation for our meeting next month. But we were pleasantly surprised as well. What really is becoming clear for us, even though we have 17 different themes that we discerned in 2022-23 as part of the universal process, all kinds of issues. But as we're moving forward, what's really coming out is baptism is like it's the key to it all. Baptism is a paradigm that holds it together, because who I am as a baptized, who we are as baptized, then expresses itself in all these different ways that are maybe the issues, yes, but the issues are rooted ultimately in actually our identity, our baptismal identity. So what you're saying really resonates with us, certainly.
Thank you so much for your time. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and it's so lovely to hear what's happening. That you've got this legacy from 2016 going forwards in synodality, but also the kind of Rome experiences and what's going on next.
Well, of course, I have to say, Avril, to be honest, with all the limits I have and we have, that I also have to say.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a long, long journey. I keep saying we're like 3 days into the 700-kilometer Camino, aren't we? Like we're just getting the blisters and we're just walking the boots in right now.
Exactly.
It's a long, long way to go. So no, absolutely. But I think it's lovely to see examples of where this is even, taking steps, green shoots, and I think it's so helpful. I mean, one of the things I just wanted to ask you just to finish up with is, do you have a standout line or phrase or even idea from the final document that it's something that you kind of keep going back to time and time again?
Well, that phrase I quoted earlier on, I just think that synthesis phrase, that synodality is a path of spiritual renewal and structural reform. So it can't be just one or the other. But what does that help us to do? It enables the church to be more participatory, in other words, everybody involved as much as possible, and missionary. Now, that's important because people forget that synodality is about mission. And I liked what Pope Francis, in one of his talks, he quoted Pope Benedict and said, look, the fact of the matter is God has spoken. God has entered into our world. He's broken the silence. Mm-hmm. But the big question is, how do we communicate that today? And Pope Francis said, this is the key question of synodality. So it helps the church to be more participatory, missionary. Why? So that we can walk with men and women of our time radiating Christ. I just think it's a fantastic definition.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful. Thank you. And
Thanks, Avril, and thanks for all you're doing. And it's wonderful the school is doing so much. You've offered so many resources online. I think it's a great treasure trove for people to move into and see.
thank you. And we should tell people that the reason this has been recorded is because you have your own assembly day when we're meeting on the 18th of October. So
Correct. We'll
best
do it.
excuse ever for not being live
And
with
say a prayer for us. Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
us. We absolutely will. Thank you so much. Thank you.